I'd like to thank you all for joining us for our webinar today with Dean Amhaus from Milwaukee in the USA, focused on water-centric cities. We are honoured and delighted to have Dean with us in Australia. It's the first time he's visited here, and so definitely his first time in Melbourne. Dean is, thank you. Milwaukee has been an innovating city with the United Nations Global Compact Cities program since 2009, and it has been a joy and a privilege to watch the journey of Milwaukee during that time, having had a couple of visits and much contact in between. And it's a very special moment that we have this opportunity to share Milwaukee's story with some of our participant members, and also with a broader group of friends and colleagues here in Australia and in other places. And we look forward to taking Milwaukee's story and its particular model of inclusive economic development further across the network of global compact cities. So I'll hand over to Dean and say thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thanks very much, Liz, and it's my pleasure to be here, and it's been always good to work with the Cities program and with Liz, and I still remember back when we had our Global Water Center opening, and you were there, and to be a part of it, that was a historic time for us, and we were just glad that the Cities program was part of that piece of our history as well. So I just want to thank you very much for inviting myself to be here. And I see that we've got some my friends and colleagues back home in Milwaukee. So a shout out to all of you. It's later in the evening, and as I said to Liz, you all need to get a life and not be listening to me talking about what's going on. But I'm glad to have some of my colleagues back home as well listening in. And I truly want to have this as more of a conversation of what we are doing in Milwaukee, and more specifically around water. And so I'm just going to go through a number of slides, mostly a lot of pictures to really talk about what we're doing. But when we start thinking about from a water-centric cities standpoint, honestly, I don't think about that as something that is unique to any city, because in fact, really, every city, every town, and every village is a water-centric city, because we cannot conduct business. We all cannot survive without water, and so even from picture like here of in China, how water is used to be able to move goods to market and to industry. To making of pasta and how water is used in that system, to closer to home to Milwaukee of brewing beer. And we use water as part of our entertainment. A picture here from Las Vegas, and how it really is injected into the celebration of all what we do. Water is very social as well, and so it brings people together to socialize, to certainly have access to this water. There's sort of a dual image here in terms of this message. Not only does it bring people together, from a conversation, and I've heard of stories of places where this is real important, and even bringing piped water, that there is some places they don't want this, because there's a whole social aspect that's going on, and I think that's really part of the cities program and the effort. But what we also have found, how water can divide us as well. And while this is a little bit a dated picture, it's probably it's from 2 years ago actually, but in Brazil it's a terrible situation that's going on there right now, and there were protests and riots over the fact of not having water. And in so many places around the country, this is playing out. And for us in the United States, this is certainly something new to us, but just even recently in the city of Flint, Michigan, where we found, United States is not immune from, really tragic situations, not only for the city, but all the people that live there and the businesses. And so water is a great opportunity, but it's also a huge risk that we all have to pay attention to. And that's really what I think is important when we start thinking about it as a water-centric city, is how do we embrace water in its complete stand. Here's an image from a few years ago, Hurricane Sandy, which is, was a tragic storm that hit in the United States, and certainly we get into the discussions of climate change and the impact. Tragic situation where there was way too much water that descended. But what was interesting is when this happened, what was the first thing that they brought in was more water, because the citizens needed to be able to have the water to be able to survive. So, before there's food and before there's energy, you've got to be able to have the water. And as I said earlier, it is a hard situation for many young girls and women in countries where they are dependent upon having to walk to be able to get their food, get their water. And I look at this, picture, and it is a terrible human cost, but this is also an economic cost, because what's happening are these young girls do not have time to go to school at all, because they have to be able to move the water, and the women too cannot get jobs because they have to spend the time getting water. And as we've talked with different international aid groups, who are very interested in bringing schools and books to children across the world, we've really said to them, the first thing that you really should do is to start bringing them water, make sure that they have that water, because without that access to water, they simply don't have time to be able to go to school. And so provide them the water. So closer to home, back home in Milwaukee, if you're not familiar with where we are located in the state of Wisconsin on the shores of Lake Michigan. We're about an hour and a half north of Chicago. And as we were talking about earlier, we are not, considered one of those large cities in the United States. And but we're also very proud of what we have become as a city that has a huge concentration around water. And I'll speak about this in a little bit later, is the idea of becoming truly a water-centric city, so that it's not just our industry and our academia, but it's really embracing everything that's going on within the city as a whole. You look at this picture and we marvel at what's outside our window. We can see this from our office. 20% of the world's fresh water is right there in our midst. And in fact, just to give you a sense of how much water exists, if you were to take every single human being in the world and were to put it in everyone in Lake Michigan, the lake would only go up 1 centimeter. There's that much water that just exists there. So we are very, very fortunate to have access to that. And as I said, we have, right outside our footsteps are 20% of the world's fresh water. But we also take it as something that's a precious, precious resource, because of the fact that tragically, every 20 seconds, there's a child that dies because they don't have access to the water. So I think in Milwaukee, what we are trying to do is to be able to bring our industry, our academic programs, our utilities, our NGOs together to be able to help solve that. Milwaukee as a whole has really, water and water technology is not something that is new. The first settlers that came to the area were the Native Americans. They came to Milwaukee to fish and to farm and to raise their families. And in fact, the name Milwaukee is a Native American name, meaning gathering place by the water. So I think it's rather ironic that our beginnings were all traced back to the Native Americans and their ties to water. And now for Milwaukee, our future is also in that area around water, but a much different fashion. So after the Native Americans, then came the French. So we actually have strong connections with the French. And then after the French came the Germans. And when the Germans came, they started brewing lots of beer. And I mean lots and lots and lots of beer. Because of the water that was there, the close access to the farms to be able to get the wheat and the barley as well. Those breweries have gone and have changed hands. Many of them, as I say, are eliminated. Miller Coors is still there, the largest water user in the Milwaukee area. But I think it's important that when we start talking about it as a water-centric city, the fact that this is not something new for us. This is something that has been around for, in many respects, over 150, 160 years. And the industry that we're talking about today in Milwaukee were the suppliers to these breweries, to the manufacturers that were using water, the tanneries. And some of our companies trace back many, many years. So Badger Meter, as an example, is one of them. The technologies have changed, certainly, and so it has grown from, what you see on the left-hand side is it's number 7 water heater, so that is the 7th water heater that they made, to what it is today in terms of the technology and the evolution of these companies. At the same time that those companies like Badger Meter have evolved, some of our old companies like A.O. Smith Corporation started out making car frames for Henry Ford, and over decades and decades, they have now moved into a water technology business. So completely working in the water area, not only water heaters, but water filters. And they are the largest water filter company in China, moving into India and expansions as well. What we found was that we have this high concentration around water technology companies. And the roots of this really go back to about 8 years ago, when we were going through a regional economic development effort, and we wanted to be able to identify what were the core industries within our region. And there was many of those businesses that we found that, I shouldn't say found, but reinforced what we had already. We advanced manufacturing and medical instruments, financial services. But what was new was this realization that we had this core industry going back to the breweries and the manufacturers that were using the water. These were the companies that were making the pumps, the valves, the meters, the pipes, the fixtures that kept the water system continuing to move forward. But why we didn't know about it was, from a simple standpoint, there was no business code for water technology, and there still continues to this day. And so typically what you will see is a lot of consulting firms in the economic development area will go and they simply look at what's the largest concentration of codes, business codes, and that really identifies the industries. We found ours because a smaller group, Vanderwall and Associates, really started to look at these businesses in a more personal way and saw this thread of water that was literally flowing through every single one of these businesses. And what we were able to do was to bring our industry together with our utilities and with our academic programs, because that was another thing that we found was not only the strength of the businesses, but at that point it was the Great Lakes Water Institute, which 40 years ago had started up along the Great Lakes in the Milwaukee Harbor, and over that 40-year period of time had become the largest freshwater research facility on the Great Lakes. And that facility is now gone through renovation, and I'll talk about it in a moment, but it's the only school of freshwater sciences in the United States, one of 3 in the world. So we've got the industry, the academic programs, great utilities, and NGOs. And what the Water Council as an organization was created by industry of being able to pull this all together to take that advantage of what we thought were 50 businesses. And as we keep on discovering, there are now close to 170 businesses that are all dealing with this freshwater cycle of pulling water out, treating the water, using the water, retreating it, and putting it back. Something that puts Milwaukee at the center, and as we presented ourselves to the UN Global Compact Cities program, was a differentiator, is that we had industry that was embracing this full cycle. From that, again, the Water Council was created as an economic development organization. We have as our 3 primary objectives is growth of the businesses that are in Milwaukee, starting up new businesses, and of course, attracting businesses that are in the water technology area. Also, the second is talent development. It's not uncommon for businesses as a whole, but also specifically in the water tech area, an aging workforce. How do we find the new talent that's going to be able to come in and replace those individuals? And obviously, we want to be able to attract students from across the world to come and study, come work for the businesses. And then the third piece is really getting into innovation and technology development. And there, again, is the close alignment between industry and academia. From the creation of the Water Council, we've done a number of different programs to help foster that. Most notably is what we call the Brew, going back to our roots of the brewing industry. But instead of brewing beer, what this is really is brewing water technology entrepreneurs. And so we have a program each year where we bring 6 small businesses, entrepreneurs into Milwaukee. We provide them space in the Global Water Center. We give training to them to be able to help them grow as an organization, but also not only as a business, but also to mature their technology as well. And after that year period of time, they can, leave. They can do whatever they like. What we've been able to do is to keep those companies in Milwaukee because of the strong ecosystem that we've created. We have also now started to work with the Small Business Administration at the federal level and taking what we are doing in Milwaukee and starting to be able to work with businesses across the entire nation to be able to help them to grow, whether they be in El Paso or Jacksonville, Florida, that they can use the Water Council as that source of a connector. Coming back to what I talked about earlier was the Global Water Center. So early in our creation, we had the idea of how could we, foster those new businesses and those entrepreneurs. And instead of the idea of growing these businesses and attracting them and having them spread out across the entire, city or across the region, we wanted to be able to concentrate them in one location. And so we identified, this old warehouse. It's a 7-story building. When we started to look at it, it had seen better days. It was, as they say, had good bones, but was pretty much vacant. And we converted it, this building, which is just less than 5 minutes from Milwaukee's central downtown, into what is the Global Water Center today. And it is truly a water technology accelerator building. So everything that is going on in there is finding solutions for the marketplace around water. We are different than a lot of small business accelerators because of the fact that many of those accelerators are only focused on small businesses. So you might have somebody that's working on fresh water, a water meter, but then somebody's working on a medical device or somebody's working on a game for a phone. The accelerator, all they've got in common are small businesses. We wanted to add a different element so that everybody is focusing on water, but also to bring in very large businesses. So we've got corporations that are in there, A.O. Smith, Badger Meter, Veolia, Rexnord, which is a roughly $2 billion corporation, has actually even moved its C-suite. So the CEO is there. On the top two floors are the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and the School of Freshwater Sciences and College of Engineering and Marquette University. So you have within this one place this interaction between large industry, entrepreneurs, university researchers, graduate students, all working in the space of water. So what we converted was, this old space into what is today the entrance into the Global Water Center and the facilities. And you can see off to the left one of the many labs that are in the building as well. We also wanted to use this, the center, as a trigger for a larger economic development for the region. We had a grander sort of role, not only as a water technology cluster, but we believe that this could be, again, a help for the overall community in the city. And just to be able to give you a sense of location, this is a picture showing where the Global Water Center is. And literally just 4 minutes south is the School of Freshwater Sciences, which is, again, something that we discovered probably, again, 8 or 9 years ago. And its roots started in an old tile factory that had been operated by a business called Allen Bradley that is just very close proximity to this facility. Allen Bradley used it for a year. They gave it over to the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and converted it into this research facility around fresh water. It continued to grow over a period of time, and then just a couple of years ago, they built an addition onto the facility. So a 55,000 another 100,000 square foot addition onto their facilities where they do a lot of the basic research around water from the Great Lakes, but aquaculture and really addressing issues around the world as well. Coming back to the Global Water Center, this is a picture looking west, and you can see this area that had gone through a variety of different sort of uses. It was an area that was for trucking, and for many years it was also vacant. And so when we came in to the Global Water Center, it looked like this. Dirt roads, overgrown. You can see off to the right is the Harley-Davidson Museum across the canal, and just to the right of that is Milwaukee's downtown. But a lot of the buildings in this area were vacant. And with the Global Water Center, we wanted to be able to have a larger impact, again, as a water-centric city, is how do we embrace it in its totality? So we wanted to, work with the city of Milwaukee to make this as a demonstration on how a water-centric city should look at a business park. And the city had designated this for special development around, water technology businesses. We asked the city to work with the private developers is to introduce new technologies, new solutions into this as a way to show how to manage water. And so we started to transform this, and is what it looks like today. There are certainly things that you can see from this picture and things that you can't see, but it really is geared towards making it as a self-contained water central area. So where those cars are parked is a special road surface. One of our entrepreneurs called Pave Drains, so the water runs off the road, goes into the pave drain system. You can see the bioswales right next to the sidewalks that are there. We've also introduced purple pipes so we can get into water reuse, something that's very familiar in Australia. It is a new aspect for us, and certainly in Milwaukee. I remember when we went to the city engineers, they had never heard of purple pipe, and and we told them what it was for in terms of water reuse. Their second comment was whether we could introduce this. They said no. And we educated them, that there are places in the world where it does work, as again evidenced here in Australia. So we've actually put the purple pipe in there. This is a business park, and 70% of the businesses are focused around water technology. That is the first building that is opening up literally in just a few weeks. And it is a global headquarters for Zurn Industries, which has moved from Pennsylvania to come here in Milwaukee. But we've also started to develop all the surrounding area as well. So many of those darker buildings have all now become housing. Other businesses that are in there as well, and you can see the sort of images of what we project for the future for this global water technology business park. The first building is on the lower or on the right-hand side. We've completely filled our building in the first global water center, and we are now moving on to our second building. Again, focused on small businesses specifically, but we're taking is an old warehouse and converting it into another facility. The impact upon this whole overall water technology district, from what I showed you earlier of the Global Water Center, the School of Freshwater Sciences, has taken a dramatic change for the neighborhood. And what we have seen literally in a matter of just 2 years, 3 years, development that has gone on. So it's not just the water technology businesses, but we have new apartments, new businesses that have moved into the area, new restaurants. And so for Milwaukee, it has truly become the hottest neighborhood in the city. And, we feel as though that the Global Water Center was certainly a trigger of being able to bring those businesses together with the academic programs, and it's benefiting the city in significant ways. And even, we've seen that just in a short period of time is the property values have gone up for the city as well. So it's, again, water is the central theme of this, but its impact is much, much broader in scope. Even just in the last 2 years, another $300 million in investment in over 1,000 housing units. Now, we may think of Milwaukee as a place that, certainly we embrace it, but we also have our challenges with water. This is a picture of a few years ago, torrential rains that hit, and literally we had rivers and rapids in our city as well. And so this is not, it's becoming more common as we see not only in the United States, but other places where we have these 500-year storms or, these long periods of droughts. And so how do we, manage and work with that as well? And so early on in our development, we also became involved with a group called the Alliance for Water Stewardship. And this is set up international voluntary water standards for the world. And we have served as the North American headquarters of that operation. But this is really working with all types of businesses. The realization is that we all have a stake in how we manage and how we work with water. And so for within the United States, I think what we have come more to realize is how central it is to our economies. Unfortunately, I'll say is that California has raised the attention. I mean, their the drought that has gone on there within the United States is now starting to raise this consciousness. We have to pay attention to it. That's only been reinforced, just in the last year because of the issues in Flint, Michigan with the lead pipe. But it really is the setup of the idea of water standards and water usage is how do we embrace it as that full water-centric city. And, this has really come about for Milwaukee, especially the Mayor Tom Barrett, who is a signature to the Global Compact City program, has really taken this on as something that he wants to see not only from the industry and the academic programs, but how do we embrace this as a whole complete program within the city, but also going beyond the city and into the region, and to be able to look at it as, how do we attract people from a visitor standpoint, but also attracting talent? How do we work and engineer with this? And water from our infrastructure to our businesses. And then this idea of one water, and to start to break down these silos of, instead of just wastewater silo and drinking water and then storm waters, how do they all get tied together? Because it's critical as we start looking at it from a climate change as well as that connection of water energy nexus. And so what we here in Milwaukee have done is really start to celebrate that resources. So an image here of our art museum literally on the lakefront of Lake Michigan. But we've also had to change our practices. So, several decades ago, we thought that, the sound water management practice was to build these cement canals to move the water. The problem was it moved the water, and it moved it too quickly as well. And so what we are gone through and gone back to is, sort of the way nature was meant to be. And I think it's really the leadership that's gone on by individuals such as Kevin Schaefer, who leads our Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewage District, is to start tearing up these canals and really restoring them back to nature. And what you have now is a method of water management, and the results are cleaner water, slower water, and you see the migration now of the fish, back and restoring it again back to nature. But it's also looking at our infrastructure from our green roofs as well. But as I showed earlier, also the road surfaces. So what you're seeing in Milwaukee is this realization that we have to look at water as a complete one system as a whole. And then most notably, as we now move into looking at how we interact between energy and water and the connection that's there. So in many respects, what we as a water-centric city have become is going back to our roots as the Native Americans. And so Milwaukee as a whole is a gathering place around water. Water technology education, research, but you're seeing now how it's being embraced throughout the entire community, that we celebrate it, we use it, but we use it with a level of respect as well. So that is my presentation, and I welcome any questions from anybody who's listening in.
Thank you very much, Dean.
So anyone who wants to ask a question, just turn off your mute. I can see one person that's done that. Is that Joe there?
Yeah, hi, how you going?
Oh, you might need to get a bit closer to your microphone.
Oh, is that any better?
That's better. Great. Thanks, Joe.
No? Yeah. So I'm chairman for Barwon Water in Geelong, which I know you're speaking down in Geelong, I think on Thursday or Friday, but I'm not able to come along. But I'm really interested particularly in the I guess, the fostering an ecosystem for water technology businesses to grow. And I'm just wondering whether you're in a government-operated environment or a private environment.
That is an excellent question, and it's something that has been very unique for us. This has been private sector driven, and
Yeah.
when we were getting started, it was companies that were leading it, and our mayor and certainly and our governor, who leads the state, they will freely state that they play a back seat towards this, but they play an integral role. And so private sector is the driver from an economic development standpoint,
Yeah.
but we could not be doing this without the government.
Mm.
And what I'll
Okay,
say,
great. Thank you.
To a large extent, is, and in all due respect to all government officials, we can move faster. And we also were able to take greater levels of risk in terms of, as an organization, that allowed us to be able to create the programs that we did.
Okay, yeah. Terrific, thank you.
Can you expand a little bit more, Dean, on the way that you do actually collaborate with government, what the role of government with the Water Council?
Right. So the mayor of Milwaukee is actually on our board of directors, and he attends our board meetings. So he's actively engaged, and we have an individual with the state of Wisconsin who is on our board of directors as well. I guess on one way to respond to that interaction is that it is happening every single day. And probably from within our staff, we are engaged with government, throughout the entire day, just as a normal day-to-day practice. Whether it's at the state level or the city level, we actually have state and city employees in the Global Water Center to be able to make that access even easier for everybody. But we have been able to sort of move past our own mental blocks of thinking about how do we reach out and how do we engage them to becoming an everyday practice. And that, is something that I don't know if we necessarily had planned, but certainly provides the added value. It's not something that's unique. And where it comes into is just extremely close communication. And we're very fortunate to have great people, both from a water council staff, but also the people with the city and state government that have this interaction.
I know that you have a particularly active relationship with, I guess for us would be state government, the governor in Milwaukee. Could you speak a little bit about that as well?
So the state of Wisconsin, and particularly with the group called the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, which is what you might consider like a Department of Commerce or Department of Economic Development. We work with them, and they and it's been a very unique program or organization, and it's an evolution of that as an organization. Whereas in the past, groups that would work with them, you sort of have to fit in their box. And you would go to them and say, well, we have a particular need. And they'd say, well, you fit in this box or that box. And what has been the evolution of that organization is it's much more flexible. And you actually start working as partners in, addressing economic development issues. So we've gone to them with an idea. They've come back to us with their own ideas and say, could you add on to this? So, a component like the Global Water Center, they have leased out a portion of the building and then gave that back to the Water Council for allowing us to sublease it to the entrepreneurs to come in at a very low cost rate. But then, just added advantage is they approached us and they said, well, we think you should also provide dollars of investment to these companies to help them grow. And that's great and wonderful, but we don't have the money to do that. They actually provided the money to be able to make investments in these entrepreneurs, to be able to make them succeed. But that relationship is not just on a financial, and I will, really strongly argue, is that a lot of the value comes above and beyond that. So we work very closely with their international development. So they're assisting us on contacting businesses across the world. They're helping to sell us and promote us. We were just down at a very large show in New Orleans last week, WEFTEC, and their marketing team helped us by setting up the booth and paying for the booth. But it's also having the staff down there from our state side by side with Water Council staff and other volunteers. So it is this synergy of collaboration at all different levels, but it's more than just dollars as well.
Does anyone else have other questions? I can't see anyone.
Probably just an operational question in terms of how would we access the video and the audio of this particular webinar?
I've been recording it, so I can send that through to you.
Awesome, thank you.
That's all right. If there is no one else, I guess that would be the conclusion.
Yeah, I have one more area I'd like Dean to expand on, and it's around the environmental management of water in Milwaukee. I know a little of the relationship with the sewerage management, but maybe if you could elaborate a bit on the work between the Water Council and the sewerage management and the impacts on that on the broader community and the environment in Milwaukee.
Right. And that's a great question. And, I honestly will give a special kudos and recognition to Kevin Schaefer, who, again, leads our the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewage District, and really consider him a visionary when it comes to water management. So if you can think about it, and this is not uncommon, his, political boundaries, are divided by communities, and he's got to deal with, the stormwater and the wastewater from those communities. And all too often, a utility will simply say, I got to just focus on that facility unto itself, the wastewater treatment facility. But what Kevin recognizes is that the issue is not just that facility, but what happens before the water actually reaches the facility, especially when it comes to stormwater management. Because when these large storms are impacting the region, there is just a tremendous volume of water that then they ultimately have to deal with. And he's really started to re-engineer the entire region, his service area, again, tearing up those cement canals. So you can slow the water down. It can get absorbed into the ground. Putting in infrastructure of the roads, green roofs, anything that can reduce the volume of water that he ultimately has to treat. But where he's going to that next level of engagement, and this really brings into this notion of a one water approach of how it all gets tied together, but also looking at those political boundaries and breaking them down, because what may be an issue for him could be an hour north of his boundaries, because there's a realization that there may be a farm that has phosphorus issues, that water ultimately trickles or rushes down to his area. And he wants to be able to address it that far away from his actual facility. And the realization that if he can deal with the problem at its source before dealing with it at the end, he can do his job much, much better. And so one of the things that Milwaukee is starting to embrace is this idea of one water, tying everything together, so to start thinking about it as a complete system that is reliant on each other. And I think it's a novel approach. I think there are other areas in the world that are starting to adopt this kind of philosophy, but it's moving past looking at strictly facilities to look at the complete environment.
Yeah. So just remind me again what the population of Milwaukee is.
The city of Milwaukee is about 6 million. I said 600,000. I'm sorry. Wow. that was a growth really quickly. So about 600,000. The greater Milwaukee area is about 2 million people.
Yeah. So how would you say you were tracking so far as bringing along the broader community on this journey and a vision for a water-centric city?
Well, what it's interesting is the fact that what we're seeing, from where we were, say, 5 years ago to today, people are very much aware of the Water Council. They know what we're, about. There's very positive response. And I think that people in Milwaukee are now starting to truly value water. And you see it in sort of strange sort of ways. We have just introduced in the last 2 years a bike sharing system, that you can rent and do. And they're blue. And they're actually called, and this is a Milwaukee term, but they're called bubbler bikes. And so in Milwaukee, a water fountain that you would drink from, we call them bubblers. But you're starting to see just the recognition of people that are using the terms water in their promotion standpoint. We're starting to see that from our sports teams, our cultural organizations. So they've actually created water music concerts. We celebrate it with our rivers. So the rivers which people turned away from are now embraced. So there's restaurants and are living on it as well. And now with what we are sort of using as a term is Milwaukee is really where water works. And it's both from a functional standpoint, but it's also from a recreation and a life as well. Our lakefront is embraced by our citizens. During the summer months, people are enjoying it, and really it's a place where people come together as well. And I think there's a greater recognition and a realization that we have to protect that resource.
That's probably, unless there's any other questions, that's probably really...
Yes, can you hear me?
Oh, you have? Good, thank you.
Hello. My name is Warren Weber. I'm from Rotorua in New Zealand. We live in a city which is about the... Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. My name is Warren Weber. We live in a city in Rotorua, New Zealand, which is about 1/10 of the size of Milwaukee. Looking on your website, I see that you discharge treated wastewater directly into Lake Michigan. And as far as I can see, there's no ultraviolet treatment of or other filtration of your wastewater. Do you find any community resistance, or what contingencies have you got in place for infrastructure failure, which would result in some less than ideally treated water being discharged to the lake? Thank you.
Well, in fact, the wastewater treatment facility and the water that is going back out into the lake is actually extremely clean. And so it does go back and is part of this complete system. So it was not that long ago where we would have 60 overflows. And what I would say is, where we would be discharging, partially treated waste or, not. Because of systems that have been put in place from a deep tunnel system and the treatment that we have with our facility, that has actually been reduced from 60 to, one, maybe a year that's going on. So what is being discharged back into the lake is actually being completely treated, and we are recycling. So which is really what's happening across the entire world. So the water that's being put back into the lake is clean.
Thank you.
You have another question, Warren? Does that?
Hi there. Sorry, my name is Ian Morton, calling from Rotorua as well. I just had a question just about the. I suppose, the formation of the Global Water Centre. So there's two questions. One is, how fundamental a platform was having the Great Lakes Research Facility there to enable the Global Water Centre? And second question is, was there any incumbent large industries already in Milwaukee at the time?
The location of the Global Water Center in relation to the School of Freshwater Sciences, it was very important. We wanted to be physically extremely close so that you could literally get on a bicycle and ride over to the facility or back and forth so that we are literally a few minutes away from each other. We wanted to, initially we had actually talked about having the buildings right next to each other. But we also felt as though we could do a larger, benefit to having a short distance apart and developing the entire district as well, so that it would be not only the water technology, but it's really spread out, and again, from a housing as well as entertainment. Going to your second question in terms of the number of businesses, yes, we had a lot of very large businesses that were in Milwaukee and have been in Milwaukee for decades and decades. And so that was a critical foundation to what we have now as a water technology cluster. And what we, certainly since we've gotten started, at least in the United States, there have been other communities that have said, well, we're going to create our own water technology cluster. And I go, well, that's going to be hard because, do you have companies that are 150 years old, in your community that have been working in water technology? We had that advantage of, having those companies, the names for us, I'm not sure if you'd be familiar with, again, A.O. Smith and Badger Meter, Pentair, GE, Xylem, Evoqua, and some of these have all gone through a variety of different names, but we've got 5 of the 11 largest companies are either headquartered or have major operations in Milwaukee. So that was that strong foundation of that industry that enabled us to be able to move forward with it, but also then the combination of that academic programs with the universities.
Yeah. Can I ask a question related to that?
Great, thank you.
And it's how you moved from the relationship of competition, essentially between most of those water companies, and to one of collaboration. Because I remember hearing them speak about it being a different mindset from what they used to have towards each other.
So, initially, as we were starting the Water Council up, the businesses actually did not have any competitors at all. They were, there was only one water meter company. There was only one water filter company. What has evolved over the last 5 years is we actually have now competitors in our cluster. And we are pleased by that. And I would say that they would honestly be pleased. Oftentimes you look at Silicon Valley as obviously a big success story. And there are a lot of competitors there. And a real sort of badge of honor is that we are finding that our businesses are actually stealing talent from each other as well. And that's a really great statement because they're hiring the best, but only that, what that does is create the opportunity to fill in other jobs as well. It shows a level of growth. And I'll tell a sort of a funny story of how this is literally played out. So in the Global Water Center, we had a company called Sloan Valve that makes water fixtures for toilets and restrooms. And they say they would donate all of the fixtures for the building. And of course, we welcomed any kind of donation. And then a competitor called that was owned by Rex Nord-Zurn, makes very similar products to Sloan, said that they wanted to have office space in the building as well, but they could not go to the toilet and look at their competitor at all. And so they said, well, you take all those fixtures out and put ours in where our offices are on the third floor. And we said, sure, that'll be fine. And then they moved into the second floor. We did it all over again, and now they're on the sixth floor. So you can actually go in our building and see competitors and try out different toilets to see which one you prefer. So we do have competitors now, and we are welcoming more to come in, because what that is a real sign of economic growth, where businesses have to be there, because if you're not there, then you're missing out on something as well.
Yeah. I'm just wondering what your advice would be, thinking of Rotorua and other regional cities and towns in Australia. If you're not starting from a base of a strong presence of a particular industry, what would your advice be for getting going in the cluster space and in the sort of economic development that's appropriate to your community and setting and environment?
Well, and I think it goes back to that, question that I think Joe asked before, was that relationship of, government and industry. Certainly from our experience, and we've had other places who have asked that question, you really have to have industry and business behind it, because if you do not have that, it will be destined to fail. Because, oftentimes you hear about this, governments do not create jobs, businesses create jobs. And so they have to be motivated to be able to invest in the talent, invest in the R&D, and to be ready to grow. And so no matter what area, whether it be water or other industries, you really have to have industry and businesses at the table, actively engaged with that. And when I talk about industry, we don't separate businesses from academia. We see them as one together, because each requires that collaboration. Businesses are needing the talent, needing the innovations. The universities need the ideas, the funding, the challenges that come from the business. So you can't separate them at all. And if you don't have those two working together, it'll be really hard to develop that cluster.
Thank you very much. We're coming right up to 1 o'clock now here in Australia. So I'll like to thank Dean again for the really valuable presentation today and the time. We're about to step and have a little bit more of an exchange with Rotorua via Skype. I know Dean's really keen to learn more about your region. So I'd like to thank everyone who's participated today, and look forward to being in contact. And as Mim said, there's copies will be available of this presentation afterwards.
Thank you very much.